So, good morning, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to May I Ask a Question, where Chris and I look at Stack Overflow questions and answers and try to help out. We'll be testing a couple things where we'll recreate problems and show how we go about debugging stuff. So last week we talked about accessibility for a while, and since going through that, I've fixed up a couple things on accessibility in the guides, which was pretty cool. So Chris, you pulled up a couple questions that might be our candidates for today. Do you want to tell us about the first
Yeah,
one?
sure, absolutely. Okay, so the first one is an ember-data themed one. I'm always a bit of a fan of ember-data questions because I am a big ember-data fan. Um, the the long and short of this actual problem that they're having is that it's working fine when they're trying to create this setup. So they've got an order, they've got a payment method, and then when they submit it and they are looking at, where is it? This works fine when I transition to the review order route after the order is created. It prints the name of the payment method. However, if I refresh the review order page, this is lost and I have no idea why. So this is clearly some sort of relationship issue because there's a belongs to payment method.
A relationship issue. Jen and Chris, relationship counselors.
None of this is official advice. So we'll
you have to tell your partner what you really want.
please show me the
You
payment
know.
method.
Anyway.
So essentially the thing that we'll probably try to do here is we'll try to set up um, uh, an example that closely matches this, and then have a look at the network and see what happens essentially. If we can even do that, I'm not sure if we do this with Mirage, it's going to let us have a look at the network traffic. I know that they said that they wanted to do something like that. Okay, so let's have a look. See, sandbox, Atom. Let's open up our sandbox. Okay, so just trying to think what the quickest way to use this actually is. So, have you used Mirage anytime recently?
Not since 1.0.
Oh, yeah,
I think they 1.0'd a little while back.
interesting. Because I know I've been listening to the Ember Map podcast and they've been talking about making a certain change to Mirage so that requests do show up in the network tab. Do you know if that's happened yet?
I do not know.
Okay, well, let's see what happens and we'll go from there. So let's generate some things. Ember-G order. Nope. Model. Order. And we'll also create a payment method as well. And what do we have here? We have review order, which is a root. Ember-G. Something seems different in Ember CLI because it's going much faster than usual. So what do we have here? So in our review order root, we have a model that's doing things. Let's fix our include payment method. Oh, this is interesting. Then orders, and then we're going to filter by payment status 1. get last object. Ooh, this is interesting.
This.
There's a few things here, but what I want to try and do now is just at least get it trying to request with Mirage.
Sure.
npm start. Let me have a look at the Mirage thing. Ember CLI Mirage, or maybe it's just Ember Mirage. Ember CLI Mirage.com. Read the docs. I just want to go to installation, yeah. So if I run this, cool. So that's our application route working. Get rid of you. Don't need the welcome page. I'm going to go to review order. We should get an error because it's trying to hit a route that doesn't exist. So now, if we install Mirage, I wonder if it'll work just out of the box. I seem to remember last time I used Mirage, I had to tell it to be on during development.
Oh yeah, you had to turn it to be on during development?
So I think it's like on by default in tests, but
Oh. I thought it was the other way around.
I can never remember.
I think it's the other way around.
Well, we shall see.
Don't know for sure though. Could you post a link in the chat to the question that we're working on, by the way?
I also have a question in the chat.
Yes, I was just going to say that.
Okay, after you, take away.
So how does this compare to something like Ajax is the question. So I think, meaning ember-data, how does ember-data compare to something like Ajax?
Yeah, I would say so. A stab to the face, if you could tell us if you're an Ember person and if you're kind of familiar with the Ember data at all, that would be useful.
I guess in the meantime, I can talk a little bit about ember-data anyway, just in case there's anybody else who checks out this video and doesn't know what exactly ember-data is. So Ajax is a tool that lets you make requests one at a time. Oh, a troll face. Okay. Well, now I'm down on this pathway. I can't stop.
Go for it.
So anyway, Ajax is something that lets you make requests one at a time. Oh, interesting. Great. We have Tom Dale apparently listening in. So again, I still want to finish this question though. Now you started this off. So I would say that ember-data, the real power of ember-data is that it lets you manage many requests well, cache those requests locally, be efficient with when you're getting data from your API, and when you use it within Ember, it has this incredible power where you could wait for, since it uses promises, you can wait for those responses to finish before doing things like rendering a route. You don't have to handle it yourself if data is changing in your app and you want to update the interface. It just kind of happens. So I use ember-data in almost all of my projects. And then for occasional things inside of those projects, I'll just write some requests by hand, whether using Ajax or Fetch or something like that. Because if they're one-offs, it's just a request to a service to, like, I don't know, get some GPS coordinates or something. It's really quick and easy for me to write that, I'm only using it in one place. But when it comes to the app, like the data that's important to the business value of my application, so that's data about the users, that's the things that they've created or that I'm displaying, that's where Ember data is really powerful. So
I,
do you have anything to add to
well, the
that?
only thing I will say to add to that is something that you have already spent a long time saying in the past. I reviewed your recent introduction to the Ember data. Was it defining? Where was it? I can't remember which one you changed. Routing.
Oh, I rewrote. Well, I rewrote the model hook thing most recently, and then I rewrote the introduction page of Ember data
So
as
the
well.
model hook one is the one that I was thinking about. So it's this one, specifying your routes model. Yeah, this is the one I
Yep.
remember. So I particularly liked, when I was reviewing this, I particularly liked what you had done to kind of explain the difference between essentially um, returning nothing, returning fake data, so just essentially an array of objects, then kind of building
Mm-hmm.
up to kind of show an example of just using this new fetch API, which is like XHR but modern, and then going from there to adding in like what Ember data is and kind of building on that. I think this is possibly my favorite example of answering what Ember data is by way of an example of what Ember data isn't, if that makes sense. So I really did like this.
Yes. Thank you. I
So
appreciate that.
if anybody is interested in that, I shall put a link in the chat. Okay, so
All right. So
moving on.
before we got questions from our audience here.
I got an error. So it seems to be guiding me in the right direction here. So it's you ever try to get orders something something, but there's no route defined to handle this request. So this is like in the Mirage config.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming that there's going to be like a quick start. Boom. Perfect. So we want to have in our config, we want to get orders, Mirage config. Okay, it's giving us some examples as well, which is interesting. Orders, and let's just return something and see if it explodes still.
Can you zoom
Oh
in
yes.
a bit there as
So
well?
on this
Thank
one
you.
here, let's zoom in.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, so interesting.
Good.
It is requiring us to do this as like valid JSON API. So let's try and do this
Yeah.
correctly.
So you can either make that response there in the config be JSON API, or there's a JSON API serializer built into Mirage somewhere,
Ooh, interesting.
and you can just specify to use that serializer if I remember right.
I have not used this in long enough that I don't know exactly where to look for that. But I'm also setting up our models, so I just generated them before, and now I'm kind of using the models from the example in the question.
Sure. I'll look up. I'm pretty sure this is like a one line thing. I just got to find out where. Um, Let's see. Seeing your database is that fixtures? Nope.
I could just, for now, while you're looking up that, I will make this do
Yeah,
correct
you can just make it JSON API also. It's not like it's a huge
data,
payload. So,
and then we're going to do ID type orders attributes. Well, this isn't going to even be right. So what do we have when it by way of attributes? So we've got an order that has payment status of a number and payment method, which is belongs to payment method. Okay, attributes. payment status, which might need to be stringified like this. And one, yeah, that'll do us. Let's do a comma. Pew, pew, pew. 2, 3. Right, let's see what happens. Oh, interesting. So let's see. XHR. So it's not in our network tab, but it looks like Mirage does give us the kind of like the response back. So it's kind of giving us some information to kind of dive in. So this isn't exactly what we would expect, but we should be able to recreate the problem that this person is having.
The other thing we could do is just pull up a deployed Ember app and show how you can look at the network tab to inspect requests, like in a very generic way, or like any web app for that. Like,
I think that's a perfect idea.
So I found that this happens a lot actually with new Ember developers. Is things don't get into the store, and so they spend a lot of time trying to console log the model's results, or trying to reformat their serializers and everything. And a lot of times the trouble isn't with ember-data, it isn't with their serializers, it's actually that what they think they're getting from their API and what's actually coming back from the API is different. Yeah. And just having a look over here, if you want to click on one of these, maybe we'll look at the outgoing headers and then a response that comes back.
So I pulled up the back to specifying the roots model just to make this as meta as possible. You have the kind of general requests that respond with HTML, but as it turns out, the guides are an Ember app as well. So we can actually find something in here that's getting each of the versions that are available. So this thing here is available as a JSON with JSON API data in it. So if you wanted to, you could go to this URL directly and you'd see the JSON. Now, this is a static site, so you're able to do things like that. But in certain cases, like if this person's application, they need to be logged in or whatever, they may not be able to go to that URL directly. So actually looking in here is quite useful. So you can kind of, as you say, look at the headers, the response headers. But I always go in here into the preview tab. So I get to go and have a look at the data that I'm getting back. So there's attributes. So it has all versions, current version, LTS versions. It has, its ID, its type. And as you can see here, this one specifically doesn't have any relationships. So that's the bit that we're most interested in here. So although we're kind of looking at something slightly different, you can see what Mirage is console logging for us. It's telling us the response, which is very much similar to that preview panel, which is data, which is an array of objects that have attributes. So we haven't set it up to have orders or anything like that quite yet, but we can do that now. We can have what was the relationship again? Payment status and payment method. So we can set up a relationship to show what it looks like.
Sounds good.
Okay.
At this point, I always have to pull up the JSON API documentation. And I think there's a page on examples in the the JSON API docs, there's some copy pastable stuff.
So
So, oh, go ahead.
so JSON API on the JSON API docs here, you mean?
Yeah, I always have to look up how to actually
Examples.
do the relationships correctly.
Oh, this is interesting. I didn't even know the examples tab was there.
Oh, yeah, it's the best tab.
So relationships. Oh yes. Okay. So
Yeah,
the
yeah. So, if there's anyone who's watching who's unfamiliar with JSON API, it's a standard for formatting your API requests. And basically, JSON API has thought through all of the different types of requests and settings and things that people could want to make, and then designed their specification from that. Versus what happens if you are sort of just making your own stuff up as you go, which is that you hit a new problem or a new business requirement and you have to come up with this new way to represent it. So I'll give an example from my last work. We were uh, we were working with huge amounts of data, and some of our customers wanted to see tons of metadata about it, and others did not. So, the engineering team was like, well, what should we do? Like, someone's like, okay, well, I guess we can make a query parameter, but we already had so many query parameters, or maybe we could make another endpoint whose job it is to return like these lean results that have all the metadata stripped off. And I was like, no, I think there's a thing in JSON API. And we were able to use something called sparse field
mm-hmm.
sets, and we didn't have to make any decisions about how we were going to represent them. We could just follow the spec as it was written. So you know the thing that is one of the downsides of JSON API is when you look at a document like this, you're like, oh, this is like so structured. I have to go look it up. But there's a reason for it. There's a reason everything isn't just flat.
Yeah.
And so, although it's a little bit complicated, it might feel complicated when you're making a tiny request to see all of these fields here. But if you're building apps in the real world, the complicatedness isn't how many keys and values your JSON has. The complicatedness is like, how do you know how to structure it? How do you maintain it across time? How do you make sure that all
Mm-hmm.
of your API endpoints are consistent with each other? And so I hated JSON API at first because I was like, this is really wordy. And the more I actually got into building real apps for real clients within a team of other people, the more thankful I became that it was something that existed.
It's interesting as well because I remember writing a blog post about this a while ago. The original intent of like people who were making JSON API was not for everybody to write it, not for everybody to learn this structure and to like
Mm-hmm.
manually handcraft APIs that spit out something that looks like this. But it's really designed for the library authors. So I
That's true.
think in this question they're using Django or something. Where is it? It said it's somewhere. So they're using Django. Um, so I know there happens to be a Django JSON API
Mm-hmm.
plugin or whatever. So there's a thing that allows Django to speak it as you'd expect.
Yep.
And ember-data essentially knows how to speak JSON API. So the fact
Yep.
that
And so does Mirage.
exactly, so each of these things all know how to speak it, and you never end up like parsing this thing. You just use the
Yep.
store, and you use something else that's using this thing. Um, so with that in mind, I was thinking we could go down the route of like trying to return a thing like this, and that's fine. We can do that. But I was also thinking, I know there's a thing in JSON API that allows us to be able to like create. So like
What?
you can create data using Mirage. So if we go back to
Oh.
the question, the whole point here is that they're creating an
Mm-hmm.
order and payment method. So they're setting it all up. They're hitting save, and when they go to the
Mm-hmm.
review, it's working fine. But when they refresh, it's not. So that's the thing that I
Yep.
want to check.
Okay. Oh, yes. I see. So well, yeah, there's I think, is it fixtures let you actually interact with Mirage using real API requests, I think. There is a feature though, I know what you're talking about.
So this is the dynamic thing.
I've never I've never actually set up the dynamic um data side of things because in my applications I was just displaying data when I was using JSON or when I was using Mirage. Um, hmm, we could try it. Seems good.
Interesting. This is so strange. Scenarios default. Server create list. This is so bizarre.
There's a lot of setup, which is why I always I just was always doing something quick with the
Well,
config
let's
file.
try it.
I think you could do the same thing. Just don't call save. I mean, I know that's sort of the point, right, of the question, but um, their problem is probably like if something saved your API, it saved your API, and so there's something else going on. But I don't think we necessarily need to replicate the full save
Yeah,
here.
I think you're completely right. Um, this function's also a bit weird. Well, we can talk about that in a second. So the thing that I was thinking here is that we probably want review order to be, so this is going to be a single object. So I think we want this to have a path. So the idea is review ID. So it's like we're going to have an order that has an ID or something like that, you know. The save thing's a little bit awkward just because we won't have an ID at create time, so we'll just have to make sure that we create it. And what I think that we'll do is we'll have like an index route that just has a button on it that creates an order with a payment method. So I know there's probably better ways to do this nowadays, but I'm going to do it anyway. Create order. Bing. And in our index controller, we're going to create our actions. Create order. That do they have an example of the creation aspect? No, they don't. So we're just doing let order equal. Actually, I wonder how this works. Let payment method equal
I can't write classic Ember anymore.
you are too steeped
I
in
can't do it. I can't do it. I don't know what
Octane.
anything is anymore. Yeah.
So create record payment
It's like if you sat me down in a room with no internet and no CLI, you just gave me an empty text page and you were like, "Jen, write a component with some actions on it." I'm like, I don't know what to do anymore. I can't my memory is all jumbled. But it's turning out pretty good. I've just looked at the Octane guides too much.
don't have a store in our controller by default,
Yeah.
so I needed to create one. What is our payment method? What does it have? It has a name. has a name. It's fine. Credit. So our payment was credit card, and then we want to do let order equal this dot store dot create record order that has what do we? So does an order have? It has payment status. Index. Oh, where are we? I should be in here. So it has a payment status, which is a number, paid, whatever, I don't know. Payment method. Okay, let's see what happens. Did I break all the things? We need our index. Okay, so we have a button. That's really small. The biggest button in the world now. So we want to create it.
Cool.
It's creating it. And let's have a look at our Ember data store. We have an order. We have a payment method. ID is null, but we'll have to fix that. Payment method happens to be... Ooh, what in the world is this? It's a proxy. Weird. So it seems to be all hooked up correctly, essentially, which is nice. So the thing that I want to do now is I want to this dot order ID not null. Transition to root view order and we can pass in order, I assume. I think that works.
I think so. It takes either.
Well, hey.
Cool.
And now what we want to do on our payment, where are we, templates, review order thing, is we want to put out is something like model.payment status, and then we want what was it, payment method is order.paymentMethod.name. Okay, so this isn't going to work straight off. Ooh, interesting. It is working. Create. Huzzah! Fun times. So this is it working first time around. Payment status, and then we could put in a ID. This is interesting. Review. So ID is not null. Oh, why did it do that for me? Don't do that. Don't be smart. Come on. ID is not null, payment status is 1, and payment method is credit card. Okay, so this is without saving anything. We then, what did we say we were doing? So in our review order, this thing's a little bit strange. What it's doing is it's finding all of our orders and then saying to include payment method, and then filtering by payment status 1 and getting the last object, which I don't know seems reasonable. Like, I'm assuming that their question is they want to review the order that they've just created. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And so when I'm looking at this, actually, my thought is that their router So in your example, Chris, you put our API request stuff in the index routes,
Hmm.
right? And so it's going to get hit even when you're on the child route and that request still gets made. My impression of this is that this person's router might be that they have two sibling routes, one that's, the route that they're creating data on, and then another route that is where they're displaying the data. They refresh when they're on that second route,
Hmm.
and that second route doesn't have a model hook defined. That's my guess. And so if you're not on a route that's a descendant of another one, then your Ember's not gonna. There's nothing to make the data request. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do get what you're saying.
I think that might be the
Well,
problem. It could be.
uh, I think
Or
what you're saying is right. So I think they're definitely creating this stuff, because this is the thing, they haven't included where they're creating their data, like which route it's been created on, and that is an important piece of information. Um,
yeah,
and actually, what you're saying about it being on a sibling, I think, is correct. And as it turns out, that's what we've got set up here. So
is
yeah,
it?
so we're creating it on the index, and then when we're done, we're transitioning to the review order and passing the order in, so that the URL changes
Mm-hmm.
to review not null. And I think, personally, I think this is where the difference is. I think that.
But you're refreshing. If you refresh here,
Mhm.
it still knows about that data. What happens?
So it's not. It doesn't know about that data. This not null.
Oh, I see. You did. Okay, so you did simulate this. We're looking at a different
Yeah.
thing.
So
Okay,
the
continue.
interesting thing here is that I have a feeling, based on the model hook that they've described, that they're not actually using dynamic segments, because
Mm-hmm.
there's no dynamic segment usage here. There's no params. They're
That's true.
they're
You're
getting
right.
all of the orders, and then essentially on slash review order, they're showing the latest. Is that right? Find all. Well, they're showing the first, no, the last object that has a payment status of 1. So it's a last paid order, I assume. But that's assuming that the
Mm-hmm.
order that comes back from the server is in order of like time or whatever. It's really dependent on that,
Right.
what's coming back from the server. Instead of creating the order like what we did in our controller index, and then like transitioning to that order to review, if that makes sense. So really what they should be doing here is adding params here, and then instead of being find all and all this like filtering stuff or whatever, they should be doing
Mm-hmm.
um, no, find record order params.id. Did I include it as ID? Let me just check.
I have. I will say I have done stuff like this before. When working, like they're doing here in this question, when working on an API that didn't have
Oops.
um, find individual records and points for something.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was find all was the only option. Um, and so I did end up doing a bit of filtering, and the sort order was guaranteed, so I could actually specify the sort order as one of the query params.
Interesting.
But I did have to work with the full set of results from find all. Not full. It was paginated, but
But then you had to.
so that is a real thing that people run into. If you're not in control of the API.
Can I ask a question about that? Did you
Yeah.
have to like find the record that had the same ID? So like you'd still have a param sent in, and then you get the response, and then you'd like filter it and find the one that has the same ID as what was passed in.
What did I do? Let me think. Yes, I did that. Now that I think about it, so I was working with an API that also didn't have
Ooh.
relationships represented, and so I would make the requests and then match the two together. And for a while, I did that in the model hooks until I got tired of having that complexity in the model hooks, and instead wrote some fancy things in serializers and whatnot to kind of like sweep that whole thing under the rug so that people could just write normal model hooks and it would just kind of work within that app. So it got weird pretty quickly. I think that's the part that people struggle with a lot when it comes to model hooks and data is like everybody's got a different weird thing about their APIs unless you are fortunate enough to have an API that matches one to one with the front end. I know companies that do that, and I haven't heard anyone who says they regret it. I've heard plenty of places say they regret not having a closer match between the front and back end. It like causes some pains, but that's the challenge here. It's like you're trying to match together two things that don't fit, and their Ember and Ember data give you plenty of tools to help make that match, but um, there's still there's still a layer where there's like if you're dealing with inconsistency, it's just annoying. It's about the interplay between the front and the back end more so than it is about Ember data and most of the problems that people encounter.
Yeah, I completely everything that you said, I agree with all of it. And it's interesting because what you were saying earlier on about the benefits of JSON API is another way to get around this, where like
Yes.
having two sets of engineers coordinate is hard at the best of times because, you know, the back end want to do things back end ways and the front end say no, we needed to do it this way, you know what I mean? And actually
Mm-hmm.
having a standard to work towards, like JSON API, it's like just follow these rules.
Yep.
You know, as long as you follow these
Yep.
rules, the front end can say, "Oh, okay, I'll follow these rules," and it makes sense. And the back end can also do the same. So it removes this kind of these fights that you have between the back and the front end.
Right. Right. Which I mean, that said, it is helpful to follow other people's examples of how to solve this, but the challenge is you're never going to find anything that you can copy paste
Yeah,
exactly as
yeah,
written. You've got to do a little bit on your own, and even if you weren't using Ember data, instead you'd be faced with, each of your model hooks is trying to parse its own response separately, or like, if you use a different data fetching library, you're still never going to be completely matched one to one because that's just not
yeah.
how the world works. But anyway, um so if they have what's our
So,
what's our advice to this person? Are
well, we're
we
not we're
do we
not
have an idea?
100% done yet, and we're just about at the point where
Okay.
we can start actually showing them the problem. First
Okay.
thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of our space in the not null because it's going to cause us a lot of problems in a second. If we go here, so
I'm laughing at our chat right now. Tom says every line of code I've written is copy pasted from Stack Overflow, including Ember. Great, thank you.
that is both terrifying and reassuring at the same time.
That's hilarious.
Uh, oh, this is interesting. So your app tried to get orders not null include payment method. So let's have a look here. So we're going to now show the difference, the big difference here. Mirage config. So we want to orders not null. We want to return ID not null, type orders, and it's actually just data, so we can get rid of this. Pew, 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 pew. And now we're getting a similar situation. Are you laughing at the chat again? What's going on in here? Let me have a look.
I'm sorry, I'm distracted. I should hide it.
Well, this is the thing. The chat's the best part about these streams. Robert Jackson is saying, isn't that just programming? Ember is just a Frankenstein monster of stolen Stack Overflow code. Yeah, everything I've ever written is taken from Stack Overflow.
Which is what brings us
Exactly.
here, right?
We need to add more Ember so that we can actually use these
we gotta
pieces.
do some Stack Overflows.
The
people need the copy paste.
I cannot. There's a feeling I get every so often where it's like I've come across a question or a problem that I'm hitting, and I Google it, go to Stack Overflow, and there's an answer there that's written by me that I don't remember.
Oh, I do that to my own blog post.
Really?
Yeah. It's a weird feeling where I'm like, thank you, past Jen, but also slightly horrified that
you start reading it.
That's
it's like
not that I don't remember the answer because I've exported my brain to the cloud. That's not the disturbing part. The disturbing part is that I have no memory of actually writing the blog post about the answer. Like I don't expect myself to remember syntax of things. The thing that the one that I have hit multiple times is how to inject a service into an acceptance test. I think is the one that like I click on it, and I've done this 3 times, and I'm like, oh no, here I am again, and I've forgotten again that I had ever written about it. But I don't know, it's God, I guess. All right. What do we got?
So I want to actually show something here, but I don't know exactly how to do this. I want to do parameters include equals payment method. Does anybody know? Ooh. Schema put post batch options. Do you know how to get to query parameters in Mirage?
What do you mean by get to query parameters?
So the request that's coming in is /orders not null include equal payment method.
How do you actually get them in your fixture or config?
Yeah, because
do they come in? I would put something in your like bracket in your parentheses there and see if you've got an argument.
Well, this is the thing. I did the ... arguments and it didn't come up with anything.
Oh.
Let's try this and see what happens.
Just
gonna restart.
I have not tried to go this far with.
But it's showing the problem, so we can do it without having the 2 available.
Oh, look, Robert's got a link for us here.
Paths and query parameters. Thank you, Robert. Okay. Query parameters. Schema request. Oh. Params.id.
Wait, so how come printing ... arguments didn't work there?
That sounds like a question that I don't want to hear the answer to.
Oh.
Authors schema request, but that's with. It's not query params.
Oh, because it's using an arrow function. doesn't have its own context.
Oh,
Got it.
interesting. Aha! Include. Perfect. So this is exactly what I want. So I'm going to get rid of this one.
Thank you, Robert.
Thanks again. So, get this back because I deleted the thing that I needed. Thanks a million, Robert.
Can we keep this app around, Chris, for future Stack Overflows?
We can.
I think it's useful for us to have something with some mirage in it.
Cool. I can push it somewhere and then we can keep it for future sessions. So if request.queryparams dot include equals what was it? Payment method. Then we'll include the payment method. Otherwise, we're just doing what we did before. So the thing that we're doing right now is that when we're getting the actual order, essentially, the response only knows about the order. It doesn't know anything about our payment method. So if we're like the person who's asking this question, what's their name? Newfoundland. Okay, great name. They should, as we showed earlier on, they should go into the network and check to see what's actually being responded. So what we want to do is we want to actually, in this case, and they'll probably have something to configure on their server, we want to actually have it respond with everything that we need all in one request. So as you showed in your JSON API example, let's put this attributes here. Oh, I was actually going to put it in the wrong place. Good thing I had a look at the example. Comma, relationships, and it's payment method, whatever it is. Data doesn't need a thing, that's fine. ID, again, it doesn't really matter, 42 is fine. Type equals payment methods. And the thing that we also need to make sure, because they're saying include payment method, we need to make sure that it has this included thing in the response that actually has the data necessary for that section. This is going to be payment methods, ID 42, attributes, and what was it? It was name equals credit card. And that should work if I haven't broken everything. Boom. And the main difference here is that if you look, don't look at the raw request, look at the response, and again, as we said earlier on, this will be in your network tab. If you have a look at the response, you'll see that the relationship is set up correctly, the ID of the payment method is correct, and that payment method is also included in the include. And c'est la vie. It's working.
All right. So, how do we capture this for this question and asker person?
So, I think we should make a point of doing a screenshot of the network tab like we did before. So we're looking at it and showing how, or maybe even like a little screen recording. I don't know exactly how to do this, but like show them the steps necessary to get to this definition, what the response actually looks like, and get them to kind of like have a look and make sure that the data is coming back. So I don't know if you've heard the GIGO acronym. Is it an acronym? I can never remember which one's which. The garbage in, garbage out situation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if your network is not responding with all of the bits that you need, there's no way that Ember is going to be able to actually respond with it.
Yep.
So, and Robert Jackson is saying we should highlight this stream and link them to it. We do always, when we answer questions with "May I ask a question," we add a little section at the bottom saying this is answered in "May I ask a question," with the link to the YouTube video. And then what else? What else do we need to include?
I would also like to mention the sibling routes thing. I still think that there might be, because we don't know what their route structure is.
I think the best clue that we have here is that they're not using params, because it's not here in the model, and that is probably the strongest recommendation that I would make here, because whenever you're doing something strange like this, you're a few levels deep in like complexity or whatever, you know what I mean? So you're already doing something slightly bizarre, and you might be tripping up on it, you know? You might not know exactly where your problem lies, because you've got 5 or 6 things going around in your brain at once. If you simplify this down to what I did in the end, where it's a review order, that's literally just find record like this, you know?
Yep.
Then, you know, it's a simpler situation. We can have a look, and again, we can't do it in this particular case, but you can look at your network and see the actual request. You can see if it includes the information that it needs, and if it doesn't, then you can just use. There's a great thing that I always use here, where it's copy as curl. So you right click something in here, copy as curl,
yes.
and
I learned that last month.
It's great, isn't it?
Changes my life.
Exactly.
Anyway,
and this kind of gets around the problem of, like, if you need to be logged in for this thing, it'll include all of the, like, you know, session stuff and all this weird stuff.
So good. I wrote special functions to, like, and I would write like a button inside my app to like make the request as a way of testing things before I knew that I could do this. There's that. Anywho,
I think that's everything that we'd need to include. We've got the sibling thing that you mentioned, the params thing, and then linking out to that example, I think, is a good example as well. It's like, it needs to look like this. It needs to have relationships and included. And if you're not able to make it look like this, it's a, as you were saying earlier on, adapter and serializer thing. You can make it, you can patch the difference between what the server should be and what your ember-data client expects.
Yep. Seems good.
Cool. I think we've run out of time for today, so unless we want to do another super quick one, we could call it a day.
I gotta go soon, but we chatted about doing the question where someone was linking their dependencies straight to GitHub. I did add an answer onto that one.
Okay, great.
So I'll put a link to that in the chat if I find it very quickly here. And then if you want to take a look, feel free.
Yeah, no, I'll take a look at that off screen.
Sounds good.
Cool. So I think if that's it for today, we can say our goodbyes. And I think next week is our last session.
It is. The last week of May. The last session of May I Ask a Question.
Yeah, so it's next Wednesday again. So if anybody does want to join in, they should follow myself or Jen on Twitter. I'm relate, real_ATE. And how many W's is in yours again, Jen?
Many. There's 3.
So J.
It's like the World Wide Web. That's all you have to remember. J, World Wide Web. Then you've got to my. If you type that far, I should come up. If there's anyone else who comes up, then they're just being copycats.
You just see like all these copycats with like 5, 6, 7 W's.
No, no, thank you. Just me.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I'll post a link to your Twitter on the YouTube description, and if you follow us here on Twitch as well, um, then you'll be able to get notified. Oh, I think we
aw,
just got our first cheer.
yay.
I'm still trying to learn what this actually means, but thanks a
Thank
million,
you.
Robert Jackson. You are a legend. You are number one on the cheer spot right now.
All right. Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody. See you next week.
Thanks.